Hi everyone. Yes, so hopefully the screen is sharing appropriately. I was having a little challenges with getting it sharing at the beginning here. So yeah, today we're talking about accessibility advocates, specifically kind of in the public facing context. So we'll jump into it, but there we go. So first off, kind of what is an accessibility advocate? There can be a few different definitions of this. There is a more kind of internal role for your accessibility advocate as well, and we might dive into that on a later date. But today we're kind of talking about the accessibility advocate in the context of being the member of your organization responsible for fielding, documenting, responding to, and closing the loop when users reach out with accessibility feedback or issue reports. So, obviously the most important thing here is identifying the correct person to be your accessibility advocate in the organization. You want to make sure that your accessibility advocate is well positioned to offer reasonable accommodations, aka to help your users or customers access your goods or service as soon as possible. And that they are empowered to advocate for the remediation of barriers and the improvement of accessibility, especially when that feedback comes directly from your customers. The person or small team best positioned for this role varies considerably from organization to organization. So that's kind of, as we get into the potential roles for this, it might vary. So we can talk about for e-commerce sites, often the person best positioned for this is a leader on the customer support or help desk team. Whereas if you have a more technical application or piece of software, this person might be a web development lead or IT staff member. And then obviously, if you have an internal dedicated accessibility coordinator, they're a fairly obvious choice for this as long as they are comfortable and well positioned to actually take action when a user reaches out and help them navigate around that barrier. You don't want to leave your users waiting, essentially. And then the next step after this is, kind of closing the loop and properly documenting. Let's see. One thing else I want to touch on here is because we have a lot of agency users in RAMP. So we have a lot of agencies who use RAMP to support their clients' accessibility. This is a really important conversation to be having with your clients. You want to encourage clients, in most cases, to designate an internal advocate because, again, this needs to be a person who can take fairly immediate action to help the customers get access to the goods or services that they are, for whatever reason, unable to access due to an accessibility issue. So this means, having that conversation with your clients, helping them select an appropriate accessibility advocate. If they're an e-commerce operation, in most cases, that's going to be, a leader on the customer service team. And then you want to help them align their, voice and responses with their brand values and customer support goals. And you can offer templates, training, and resources to help support your clients to that end. We have some resources internally. On the next slide, we'll talk about kind of a template for response. And we have a user guide article connected to RAMP. And some of these resources are linked in the Compliance Center in RAMP, which is a really great place to start as you begin to set up and think about your accessibility advocate. So training and preparing your advocate is the obvious next step here, and the most important step because you don't want to run into a situation where you have like assigned an advocate and then given them no context for what they are responsible for doing should they actually receive that user ticket. It furthers your customer's frustration, and it doesn't properly prepare your team to be empowered to actually act on this. So it's really important to begin by providing an immediate accommodation. You need to acknowledge the issue even if the customer's tone may be frustrated. We really recommend being friendly, understanding, especially if somebody is encountering barriers all over the internet. It gets really frustrating. So they may come already a little discombobulated, and it helps to immediately be available to offer them that reasonable accommodation to help them access your goods or services, but to also just acknowledge the issue and acknowledge their frustration. And then you want to try to gather as much detailed information about the barrier they encountered as you can. This is really important on the documenting and fixing side of things. So do whatever you can to understand the barrier, whether that's asking the user to kind of share screenshots, or if you've got them on the phone, maybe they can walk you through exactly what happened. You want to try to get as many technical details as you can, even though that might be challenging. So if you can't, don't stress about it. But at that point, you probably want to have a member of your team look into that area of your website or application further to try to figure out what went wrong and troubleshoot internally. And then you'll work either, the accessibility advocate themselves, or they'll work with their team or the agency they're working with to get that accessibility feedback documented. So if you have a Ramp account and you're set up in Ramp, or if your client is set up in Ramp, we have a issue reporting form that flows directly into Ramp. So it makes this step a little easier. You don't have to create the user ticket. It's just already created for you. But if you haven't, if it's, comes in through a different channel, or you don't have that issue reporting form set up as a part of your Ramp Compliance Center, then you'll want to document this, ideally in Ramp or in a centralized accessibility management platform, so that it's all in one place and the feedback loop can be fully closed. And then at that point, that user ticket can be turned into a remediation task. So an actionable remediation item that can be fixed. And you can assign that out to whichever team member or web development partner you are working with to actually get things in your website or application resolved. And then if you're in Ramp again, they can track the remediation task status right there to keep everything up to date. And once that has been resolved, you'll want to follow up with the customer and let them know that you did take action. That's really powerful, especially on the compliance front. It's really powerful to be offering that good customer service experience to your clients so they're not getting frustrated. They're more understanding that accessibility is a journey and they see that you're actually on that journey and committed to taking steps to fix things. You're not just hearing them and brushing them off and allowing this issue to persist. But also to create that paper trail so that if anything comes up in the future, or if you do receive a demand letter, you have helpful documentation that shows that when an issue is reported, you have the advocate in place and the processes and tools in place to document that, fix it, and then respond back to the user and let them know it was fixed. And then we can just touch on a couple of common challenges and situations that I see people run into when they're assigning or selecting an accessibility advocate. I think the first one is assigning someone to the role who doesn't have the right resources, or who is not properly empowered. You want to, again, just make sure that you are selecting the right persona in your organization to take actionable steps to help those users immediately, as well as documenting and advocating. So again, for an e-commerce or a online store of any nature, or even for like a physical store, a customer service rep who can actually assist with placing those orders, who can assist with giving a user directions to the store, something like that. If say they can't use your online map or store locator. Would be the best choice. Whereas if you have a highly technical application, IT might be a better choice there. And then again, there are some agencies who offer accessibility support plans and actually are able to step in and take on this role for their clients. So if that is your case, obviously you'd be aware, both on your, as an agency or as the client, and know that that is the arrangement there. And we do have this resource that we can link to the follow-up email on, kind of goes a little deeper into who you should assign as your accessibility advocate for various different organization types. So we'll send that out after. Another kind of challenge that I see, honestly, customers more so running into is accessibility pages that link to a generic inbox instead of an actual advocate. So I had mentioned the importance of assigning this to a specific person, or a very small team over a generic inbox or a larger team. And that's because when it is assigned to a smaller team or a specific person, there is a clear allocation of responsibility. If it is going into a random semi-monitored support inbox, the importance and the urgency of accessibility feedback might not be fully acknowledged. So we recommend, again, using a central and consistent documentation strategy and having a single point of contact, ideally assigned as that advocate, so that responsibilities are clear. And then finally, not documenting or prioritizing the remediation of user reported accessibility feedback. This kind of comes to the point of closing that loop and is where a tool like Ramp is super helpful. You need to make sure that this is documented, not just as an issue, but also as user feedback, because that's an important part of this process, and of showing that you have a holistic and comprehensive accessibility strategy and you are prepared to respond to user issues and feedback of this nature. So integrating accessibility into your ongoing processes and practices, making sure you have tools like Ramp in place, that is probably the best way to avoid that common pitfall there. And now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Heather, who can share kind of the customer's perspective of this situation. Yeah.
Thanks, Gianna. So that's a perfect setup for what we're going to talk about next. And I may reiterate a couple of things that Gianna's already covered, but I think from a slightly different angle. So hopefully that will resonate with folks. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the customer perspective, and we're going to kind of focus on 10 specific things that your customers with disabilities would really like for you to know and understand. Before we dive into that list, though, I just want to offer a couple of brief caveats. And so the first one is to say that kind of my portion of today's discussion is not intended in any way to like be representative of the disabled lived experience as a whole, but rather I'm hoping to bring you a little bit of historical context, cultural context, and also um, some topics that might spark conversation and hopefully facilitate some learning. And the sort of the second part of that is to say that some of the things we're going to touch on here can be a little bit emotionally charged or delicate or hard for us as humans to sort of interact or talk about. And so I just want to be really clear that this is the place to be having those conversations with your third party accessibility consultant. This is a safe, judgment free zone. This is the time to ask those questions. If you're not sure about language or what, how to ask things or whatever, this is the place to do it. No one is judging. Everyone is here to learn and have conversation, grow, and figure out how to do better together. So please know that and just feel comfortable in asking questions or bringing things up as we go. And then the last thing I'll say, which I neglected to put on this slide, but including the processes and things that logistics that Gianna talked about, as well as sort of the lived experience side of things, I'm going to talk about consult with people with disabilities as you're building out these best practices and processes and that sort of thing. You may have resources you don't even know about already working with you. It could be your employees, customers, or if you reach out to local organizations to get that kind of input, but please reach out and include disabled voices. All right, so number one of the things that your customers with disabilities would like you to know is that there are a lot of us. Um, Approximately 25% of the global population identifies as having some sort of disability. Do all of those disabilities affect people's ability to access digital content? Probably not, but it's good information to know and to consider that on a more sort of individualized level, that could mean that 1 in 4 of your customers is someone with a disability. Um, the second thing, I've used an acronym here, PWD, Persons with Disabilities. So we just want you to know that we have a basic human right to equitable access to digital and physical spaces, information, products, and services. And unfortunately, we're not accustomed to having those rights recognized or respected. Um, Number three, people with disabilities know that accessibility is essential. Unfortunately, although we're making progress now, the rest of the world has been pretty slow on the uptake with this concept. And so, certainly, gradually increasing awareness, it definitely brings excitement and anticipation of a more inclusive feature, but also brings some deeply held frustration and anger at the fact that it's taken this long. And this is, I'll just expand a little bit here. Gianna alluded to this when she mentioned that, perhaps as an accessibility advocate, you could find yourself discussing an issue for customer support or a barrier report that might seem like the person's a little extra salty or a little more fired up than what you might expect based on the situation. And I'm not in any way excusing bad behavior or saying you just have to tolerate it or anything like that. I'm just offering a shred of historical context here so that you sort of know typically how folks have been treated. And that's why we could be bringing a little extra frustration in that experience. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm happy to have discourse and conversation about that. Um, so number four, and this just kind of builds on what we just talked about. You might just be learning about accessibility and becoming an advocate and an ally, which we 1000% welcome you and are so glad that you're here. But the fact of the matter is, we've been dealing with inaccessibility for generations. And that too is just sort of a held um, kind of frustration over time. So, again, just for some historical context, um, we are, however, very encouraged by businesses like yours who are here. You're here, you're engaged, you're with us, you're learning, you're wanting to invest in accessibility and demonstrate that you value customers with disabilities. And that's awesome. Um, Number six. So we're going to talk, these next few topics will be a little more specific to, say, an interaction. If someone is calling in or messaging or whatever their preferred means of communication is to report a barrier or an issue or get an accommodation. And again, I think Gianna alluded to this. We need you to acknowledge and validate the issue that we were having as a real issue, even if you personally don't understand it. I
Mhm.
cannot convey to you how far a little bit of grace and a little bit of understanding will go. I'm not suggesting that it's a replacement for working with and remediating the issue down the road, but just kind of making that connection, saying, like, yeah, I get it. I don't necessarily understand, but I can understand that you are frustrated. Super, super helpful and sets the tone for a good interaction. Um, People with disabilities, we are the experts in our own access needs and our own unique situations and use cases, and the modifications we might need. We are happy to collaborate with you. Let us assist. Let us help you help us. Um, okay. And so, building on that a little bit, this next one kind of, I think, clarifies a little bit what I'm getting at. And that is to say, no matter how much awareness or accessibility training you've had, that doesn't automatically put you in a position where you are now qualified to understand our specific individual circumstances. So, to say, for example, that two screen reader users are necessarily having an equitable or equal experience with one another. That is most certainly not the case. And so we want to be careful not to make assumptions and saying, like, oh, well, they use a screen reader or they use magnification or whatever. I know what to do to help them. It's great if you have some general ideas and that you recognize that those issues exist, but we don't want to go jumping in and offering solutions until we understand what's really going on. And I'm probably dating myself here, but I don't know if anybody remembers Stephen Covey and his 7 habits of highly effective people. The one I think that applies here and that always sort of resonated with me is just seek first to understand before being understood. That will go you a long ways. Number 9, we're almost there. Reporting access barriers requires additional mental and physical labor for individuals with disabilities. Our time and our feedback is valuable. Chances are we just want to accomplish the thing that we're doing and sort of get on with our day. And here I just really mean to say, we don't want to cause trouble. We're not trying to get you in a gotcha situation. We don't want to sue you. We just want to get the thing accomplished. And, maybe we're on our lunch break and we need to go back to work, or we got to go pick up the kids at school, or the myriad other things the humans have to do during the day. So by acknowledging the situation, having a process in place, following the logistics that Gianna recommended, it's going to make this a much smoother process for everyone involved. It's going to make your job easier and make the task of getting the thing accomplished and reporting the issue a lot easier on the user side. And finally, number 10, be a unicorn. What I mean here is that unicorns are mystical, mysterious, magical creatures rarely seen in the wild. very much like a good accessible customer service experience. So here's your chance, be the unicorn. See this as an opportunity. Lead, be a leader in your industry. Set yourself apart from the other businesses in your industry by offering these accessible customer support experiences. And I can guarantee you it's still a rare enough of occurrence. If I have a good experience with your business, you can betcha I'm telling everybody who'll listen and probably some who won't, because it's still that unusual and it is a fantastic way to build your brand awareness and customer loyalty. And if I have a good experience, you can bet I'll be back because I'm not taking the chance on having not a great experience somewhere else. This is a super opportunity to get ahead of the curve and really make a name for yourself in your industry. So that wraps up for me. And now I think we should jump right over to our Q&A session. Hopefully we'll have some good
Yeah.
conversations here.
So yes, thank you, Heather. And just quickly, as you type your questions in Q&A or chat, which Ben, are you monitoring? Because I can't see it right now. But I would just want to summarize that we touched on RAMP as kind of a part of one way you can offer a kind of a comprehensive platform for managing this. If you are already in RAMP, I recommend you check out the Compliance Center there. It allows you to assign an accessibility advocate, add that issue reporting form to your site, and it encourages you to have multiple means of contact available for your accessibility advocate. Because as Heather mentioned, the users come with their own preferences, their own frustrations. You want to make this as easy and seamless for them to report issues and to get the support they need. It just a great customer experience, and it's one way to really wrap up your entire accessibility strategy and show that you do care about these users beyond just WCAG conformance.